All right, hello everyone. I think we had some technical issues with the sound, but it should be all right now. So good morning. It's already 5 past 10, and today we will be talking about how to prepare for the EU General Data Protection Regulation. My name is Chris Gunciarz. I'm managing partner at WAAT. I have been working at WAAT since about 8 years. First as a software developer, now as a more as a product manager, and also help our clients with things such as GDPR. So today at the presentation, first I'll talk literally very briefly about WAAT, what we do, and then we'll jump into GDPR, what it is, how it works, how it impacts your company. We'll talk about key aspects of GDPR, and then some common implementations or common things that you could implement in GDPR. So let's start very briefly about WAAT. Who we are. We're a product-focused digital agency that adapts to your constantly evolving needs. So basically, we help you to build products. We help you to build web applications, mobile applications. Since 2011, we delivered over 60 software products. And it's also probably important to know that we are a completely remote company. We're in 9 different countries in Europe. So very briefly, what we do: we help you design, we help you develop, we help you with marketing, branding, and maintenance. And of course, we help you with general data protection regulation and its implementation in your company. For us as an agency, this is also a very important topic because whenever we build anything, any new software product, we need to be compliant with GDPR. So it is extremely important also for new products as well as for the products that we are maintaining. So what is GDPR? It is here to basically strengthen and unify data protection for individuals such as you and me. It comes to life on 25th of May, so very, very soon. You have to be ready by then. So GDPR, let me say one more thing, and because I still didn't remove one application here, just a second, sorry. All right, so GDPR is here to stay, and there were previously other regulations different than GDPR in the EU. But right now, GDPR is the main one that we need to comply with. So how does it help us as individuals? Before we discuss that, we need to think about basically what is personal data. Personal data is information about individuals that could be so it's information about individual that could be identified from that data, meaning that it is data such as even your IP address. It could be your personal address and your location. So that data connected with other pieces of information comply with your personal data, and you're all owner of that data. So how does it help you? It basically the regulation helps you to make that data more secure. It makes you have more control over that data, and you know what's happening with that data. So ultimately, it's here to basically protect us. But also for organization companies, it has certain things that they need to comply with. And the main things is that basically you're obliged to keep data secure. I mean, previously it was also the case, but now it's even more restricted. You need to keep your data also documented, ideally, so that your users know how the data is being stored, for what purposes it's being stored. You also should think about things such as encryption and pseudonymization of data. I'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about how generally GDPR could be implemented. for not implementing such measures, you might be fined for for up to 20 million euros or 4% of total worldwide annual turnover. And those are the maximum fines. Previously, also, you could have been fined with the previous regulations. The fines were also pretty high. I mean, it's maybe I give you an example. It's not such a big fine, but I've been also reading a little bit about previous fines, how companies were handled. And for example, for wrong email marketing campaigns, for people that opted out from these marketing campaigns, companies had to pay for up to $70,000 to $100,000 just for sending a few hundred emails. So this now is even more restrictive, and you have to be really careful about how this works. So now we go into more in depth into GDPR, and all these buzzwords here are basically taken from the data protection regulation itself. We'll talk about who is a data controller and who is a data processor. Those are two different type of roles that manage and handle data. But before we do that, we need to also say who is a data subject, because we will be discussing that in the future, also in the presentation. Basically, data subjects. So data subjects are individuals to whom the stored and processed data is related. Basically, these are us, individuals, who manage, not who manage, but who own the data. So now, as a data controller, now we need to define basically whether you, as a company, who you are. Are you a data controller or are you a data processor? And I'll give you real life examples here. So for, let's say you're building a product. It could be an e-commerce platform, and you have users that are registering to that platform, and you're managing all the users. You're managing their data. You're storing the data. You're giving the data to third parties. You're data controller. You're person responsible for anything like data breaches. You're responsible for anything that happens to that data. And then data processor. It's basically a third party, meaning that it could be a contractor to your company. It could be a third-party service. For example, let's say Google Analytics is a data processor in that sense, because they are taking data of from your users in your, let's say, website or web platform, and they're analyzing that data. They're using it for their own not for their own purposes, but for purposes of processing that data. I just also want to say there is a chat box just next to the window here. I don't know which side, probably that side, somewhere there. Please feel free to ask questions, and I will try to reply to them real time. If you have any questions, let's say about data controllers, processors, or anything further, please ask those questions. Let's go to the next one, which is basically processing of personal data. So now, if you're a data controller, so a company, organization managing data, you have certain responsibilities, and you need to be really aware of them because they might lead to the fines that we've been talking about earlier. So one of the most important things is to always get explicit consent from your users, from your data subjects, that you're handling their data. And the consent cannot be assumed, meaning that you really have to ask someone for permission of using their data. You cannot just assume that, okay, we're going to be sending emails to these people, and or we're just using these first names, last names gathered somewhere from the internet for certain purposes. You cannot do that. If you're caught, basically you'll be fined, or basically you'll be fined. It is also important that companies above 250 people, they should, or maybe even they have to, document all the activities related to data processing, meaning how their data, how user data is handled by third parties, how it's handled by you as a company. And you also you also need to make sure that all the data processing activities by you and a third party are secure. And security by a third party, of course, let's say data processors or so another company has to be secure, and they need to maintain that. But it's your responsibility as a data controller to make sure that you checked, okay, if this company is viable, to maintain this security processes intact to keep that data secure. Another thing here that I've mentioned in the slide is the privacy impact assessments. These assessments should be basically conducted in any company that wants to start processing data. Basically data controllers that want to start processing data that could be risky to the data subjects. Meaning, let's say you have a high amounts of data and you're using some sort of new technology, or even you're working with a new company and you want to give them all that data. You should be able to, you should first conduct this privacy impact assessments to make sure that everything is safe. And then if you see that there might be certain issues later, you might want to discuss with your data protection officer, so basically a person responsible for data protection in your company, and then later with data controlling authorities in your country, you might want to also inform them about such situation. Another important thing for data controllers, and that's already related to let's say if you're building a software product, that's related to how you're building your technology, how you're building your product, and that's the data protection by design and by default. I just mentioned 2 points in here, and one of them is basically data minimization, which is a very important factor when building products for GDPR, and it means that you should not gather too much data about your users, about the data subjects. So let's say during a registration, when you are gathering first name, last name, you not necessarily want to gather the gender of that person if you're not using that data for any other purposes. Maybe you're using it for analytics, but in that way, then you need to be very clear to that user during the registration process and tell them that, okay, this data is going to be used for analytics and maybe later for certain product improvements. Also, important factor is data encryption and pseudonymization. Basically encrypting your data, encrypting the way that you let's say encrypting your how the data is being sent around your third parties or internally, and also encrypting your backups of the data is extremely important. And pseudonymization, it means that you're basically implementing a process where you change the data in a way that it's not identifiable with the data subject. Meaning that, let's say, you're having first names and last names stored in your database, and you want to use that data, let's say, for machine learning algorithms, you might want to send that data pseudonymized, meaning that you change it in a way that the first name and last name is not recognizable. And that's just one example. There will be more examples like that, depending on the use cases. So now, key aspects of GDPR. What are these? So those are the ones that I also previously spoke about. So it's for us at WAAT, I think it's basically consent, then all the rights of data subjects, and data breaches. Those are the three key aspects of GDPR that we consider, and we'll go one by one. So first with consent. This is extremely important for you as a data controller, website or mobile app owner. you should be very specific and clear to your users at any time why and how are you gathering their data. You should not assume consent, like I previously mentioned. You should be always explicit. You should ask for, you should ask the user to click a specific checkbox and say, yes, I want this data to be processed by you. I want this data to be shared to third parties for analytics, and I want this data to be kept by you. Also, any kind of updates to data processing, meaning that if you're changing something internally, let's say you're just using the first name and last name in your CRM and maybe email address, and then you want to add let's say gender information, you would have to again ask for consent to have that extra information. Even if that information was already provided to you, you're using it for different purpose. You maybe used it for internally in your website. Now you're using it for a third-party CRM, or you're using it for any third-party tool. You have to ask for a specific consent once again. Maybe you send an update email and ask that person to update their privacy settings in your application. And here are also the rights of the data subjects. So this is very important for us and as individuals in the regulations. We get really full control of what's happening with our data. Obviously, it's up to the data controller to comply with that. They normally have about a month to comply to any of the requests that we ask as a data subjects. And here are all the different rights. So right to be forgotten, I think it's the most famous one, and recently there has been a lot of talk about that. How, for example, even Google handles this kind of cases. So right to be forgotten is basically the right for you as a data subject to say to a company that they should not handle your data. And they should actually forget your data completely. They should remove your data from all their systems, and maybe together with the deletion of your account, you're completely gone and your data is not anymore available for the data controllers or for any third parties working with the data controllers. Right to access the data is basically the right to at any time see what's happening with your data, see how the data is being handled. So as a company, you should have clear privacy policies outline and also documentation stating how user data is being handled. So whenever you're asked to say, okay, how and where the data is handled, you should be able to clearly state that to the data subject. Now, another right is the right to rectification, meaning that you can ask as a data subject, you can at any time ask a company to change the data that they are handling. So it means that let's say if you have edit forms in your product, they should you should be able to always change that data in those data forms, because sometimes companies, I think it was even at Facebook at some point, where it was really difficult to change your first or last name. I think you had to write to them, and generally there were some restrictions. Now there should be no restrictions. You should at any time be able to change your data. Another right is the the right to restriction of data processing, meaning that you can ask a company to use your first name, last name, but let's say not anymore your address information. You can ask them to use, let's say, your email address, but maybe not any other certain data. Of course, this has to all work well with the software tool that you're using, or let's say if this is this is a case for any kind of real-world applications, then that has to be specified with the owner, with the data controller, how this is going to be handled. But you can ask for that basically. Another right is the right to data portability. It means that at any time you can ask a company to give you basically a log of your data, give you an overview of your data, how much data they have, where is it stored. It can be basically an exported document, document from your database or many databases that you're managing, showing to the data subject how their data is being handled. And the last right is the right to object. So you can say, okay, I want, for example, my personal information to be processed by you, let's say by you as a company, but I don't want this information to be given to, let's say, Google for Google Analytics, or I don't want this information to be given for, I don't know, Facebook for Facebook ads, or any other third party. And you can also do that. So that is important to remember whenever developing new applications, web or mobile applications. This is important to have potentially built in, or at least considered. Another important aspect is our data breaches. So whenever something like that happens, and of course it can happen, this is, I mean, out there on the internet, there is many people that want to get your data, and also not only on the internet, there are people who want to use them in their own benefit. Even recently, with for example, the Facebook issue that they had with that their data has been used for political campaigns. This can be considered as potential data breaches. So data subjects should be basically notified of this kind of data breaches within 72 hours of data controller knowing that the breach occurred. So let's say if data has been stolen from your database a month ago and you only realized it now, you're actually not really, I mean, you're in trouble, but you're not really in trouble with the GDPR authorities yet, because you only knew about it now, and you can let them know within the 72 hours that this has happened. So in case of larger data breaches, you should also notify supervisory authority, and those are authorities in different countries. There are different authorities. In Germany, there is even where I'm sitting, there is even 16 different authorities per each German state. For large companies, when you have a data protection officer, they will be handling these kind of cases with the authorities. So now, this is the more fun part, how GDPR is implemented in practice. So generally, when thinking about GDPR, you always have to consider your current let's say online, your current web or mobile applications. What are you going to do with them now? What kind of things you need to implement? And also for new products. This is also at WAAT, we have to be always aware of these kind of issues. And so here we have, here I have listed few points on how, let's say, application design can change, and how you can implement things in your application to make sure that you're GDPR compliant. So first thing you should allow your users to at any time modify their data, and this is related to the rights of the users, to rights to modify their data, and that should be easy and accessible. Another thing is to allow the users to easily delete their accounts, again together with all the data. Previously, companies when they were handling user data, they would be, for example, deleting the account of the user, but still maintaining certain information about the user for analytic purposes or for any kind of internal purposes. Now you should probably not do that. If someone wants to be forgotten, they should be forgotten from your system. You're not responsible for, let's say, these people to be forgotten in another companies, but at least in yours, that's what you should manage. You should also minimize the amount of data collected. That's, I've mentioned that I think multiple times already. This is extremely important, not to store too much data about the user. Sometimes companies, mobile applications or web applications, they would be gathering all this user data so that maybe they could later use it for something. Now you should be a little bit more careful with that, more restrictive, or at least more precise to the user when you're asking them to for collecting that data. Then pseudonymization and encryptions, I've already mentioned. Basically, you should do it wherever it's possible. You could do it on the like data transit, so whenever data is being transmitted between your database and let's say front-end applications or third-party applications, and then you should also encrypt your backups, and you should make sure that the data you're handling is encrypted in some cases, or maybe pseudonymized pseudonymization is implemented. Also, another thing that could be interesting is to not require social media registration. In some cases, when you have let's say mobile applications, especially there, actually, people often ask for mobile social media registration to make sure that the UX is much more smooth. But this is also it brings on certain issues, like for example, then you're sharing that data with Facebook, or you're sharing that data with Google, or maybe there is you're allowing for during registration, you're allowing Facebook to access your microphone in your device. You might not want to do that. You just might want to register your user. Another thing is data logging. So you should make sure that whenever data is being accessed by the user, you're requested to get data, you should log that information. There are third-party services for that you could use. And if you want to know a little bit more about all these aspects, you can always contact me, Chris, later on via email. And I will be able to reply to any of these questions, or live chat right now, just next to the video. Another thing is consent implementation. I already mentioned that. Here, yes, it's very important to have basically built comprehensive privacy settings for your applications with checkboxes that you're asking users to actually consent and click something. You have to keep your consent up to date. I've already mentioned that as well. And you should also allow users to easily remove consent. So if they don't want their data to be processed, you should have some sort of possibilities for that to happen. Sometimes, let's say if this is a mobile application and you have all these different privacy settings, you could specify with checkboxes how and what data should be processed, what not. You could check, for example, Twitter implementation. They have quite interesting privacy settings and how they are working. It's done quite well in there. Another thing is consent in online marketing. So now whenever you use email campaigns, you should basically first have your users opted in to receive those emails. You should not really send emails to people that you don't know to randomly try to attract those users. And you should always have a way for users to easily opt out of any kind of marketing campaigns, marketing emails. So let's say you're having email notifications, subscriptions. You could check as a good example how it's done. You could check meetup.com. Meetup has quite comprehensive notification options, how they are handling your emails. So you should be able to always easily opt out of this kind of situations. Another thing is tracking cookies, and basically for any web application or mobile application, you should always remember that also tracking cookies. So let's say you're getting your data for third-party analytic tools, and you're tracking your users' data, let's say your location or IP address. You need to ask them also for explicit consent. Previously, companies could just add this kind of cookie privacy policy window, or like a box that would be somewhere on the website, and you just say yes if you agree. That basically you close the window. Now it's not exactly the case. You have to, before you start tracking user data, you should ask them for explicit consent. So normally how it would look like, you would have probably like a pop-up when someone enters a website, and they explicitly have to say, yes, I want my data to be processed. For example, Google Analytics, there are ways to actually anonymize user data, like IP addresses, but this is still kind of a gray area where some companies probably will be still tracking their users using Google Analytics, but at the same time, it's probably also not entirely legal if that is done. I really hope that maybe Google has some sort of solution to that, or maybe there is already a solution that I don't know about, but that is going to be quite a challenge for some companies that are tracking a lot of user data. And yeah, last thing, at WAAT we have been developing a toolset that helps you with documenting your data and keeping records of processing activities. It also has a simplified, helps you to simplify data integrity through automated data tracking in your databases. But this is again also with the consent of the company, and then management of user data. So this toolset, you can check out some more information about this on WAAT.eu/GDPR. And you can also contact me, Chris, or anyone at WAAT to get more information about this, how we are solving some of the problems that I have mentioned previously. The toolset could be helpful for any kind of company, smaller, bigger one, that handles user data and wants to manage it properly. So that's all so far. If you have any questions, I will still be here for about the next 3 minutes or so, or 5 minutes, or even more. If there are many questions, please ask them on the live chat. And if you don't have any questions right now, then feel free either to writing to me or writing to us at WAAT.eu, and get some more information about GDPR or how GDPR is implemented. All right. I do not see any questions so far. Still 2 more minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Like I've said, otherwise, please write to me at Chris at WAAT.eu. I see a first question. Let me just check it out. Just one second. I'm going to read it. If a group of company had less than 250, can you clarify if they still need to comply with the documentation? No. So basically, if you're a company that is less than 250 employees, you should. I mean, you are not required to have a documentation about how the data is being processed. Um, but yeah, it is kind of it is still recommended to do so, even by the regulation. But you're not obliged. The regulation states that only companies above 250 needs to do it. Still wait a couple more minutes. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to ask in the chat box just next to the webinar. Thank you, Elaine. All right. I guess there are no more questions so far. So thank you very much, everyone who has participated. You will receive a follow-up email from us asking for feedback. So please help us with the feedback there, and also you will be able to see the webinar once again at our YouTube channel. Please subscribe or and also please like our Facebook page.